Us today. Okay, so we will start in 1 minute because we will wait for some more join us today. So I can see. Okay, I think Barry is the only one with the camera on.
I've put holes in the original one, so it's going to drain through.
Okay, please, I will, yeah, please turn off your microphone if you are not using. So I think we can start, Chris.
Great.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. We have an interesting session about COP26. If you don't know about COP26, this is your moment to know because we have a wonderful speaker today. So I will introduce Francesco Sindico, is the founder and co-director of the Strathclyde Centre of Environmental Law and Governance at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. He is also associate professor in the in international environmental law at the University of Strathclyde Law School. He leads the, I think this is the EILEAN initiative at the at the Strathclyde in University, where he researched about law, islands, and sustainability. And this is super important for us because he researched about islands. As part of his work on islands, he has collaborated with the Scottish government in the implementation of the Islands Act 2018, and he is now a member of the National Island Plan Delivery Group. He has coordinated with Island Innovation a global survey on islands and COVID-19, and is also co-leading with Island Innovation and the University of Prince Edward Island in the COVID-19 Islands in Science series. Francesco is also very active in the climate law field and is the founder and co-director of the Climate Change Litigation Initiative. He is also worked extensively on international water law, an area where he provides legal advice to international organizations and governments before international court. So I will write you in the chat the link that where you can find more information about Francesco's island related work at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. So Francesco.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for such a great and long introduction, after which I'm sure nobody will want to see anything else of me in a blog or anything. So you've given more than enough. Thank you so much. So it's a great pleasure to be here also this afternoon. I was here this morning with your fellow island ambassadors from other areas, from other time zones, and we had a lovely and very vibrant conversation. And I really want this to be a conversation, not a lecture or anything as such. I will, however, have some slides. I do want to take you through some ideas and through some concepts, but then I really want to also hear your own ideas. Before I open the slides, as Isabel said, what I really want to do today is talk to you about this acronym, COP, COP. Some of you will know a lot about it. Some of you may even have been at COPs, but others may have never heard about it or are very puzzled on what in the earth is a COP. So I will aim more towards the second part of groups, so those who have either never heard or are slightly puzzled about a COP. So I do beg some forgiveness for those who are experts on COPs. Now, the COP is very important. I was just listening to the news, and here in the UK, we have the G7, the group of 7. And literally, Biden was talking, and he was saying that what they're doing now in G7 in Cornwall is a step towards the major COP26 in Glasgow. So what in the earth is this COP26? And I will start sharing now. So I take it you can see this. So I'm gonna put it in full slide. So this is what I want to do today. I want to try to explain to you what the COP26 is, what a COP is. Look at COP26 from an island perspective. I will lay out some ideas, but really I would like then to discuss these with you during the Q&A, during the discussion. And then I'd like to introduce you to a project called Climate Change Message in a Bottle, which SCELG, the center of which I'm co-director, is going to carry out with Island Innovation at COP26. So what is a COP? So a COP stands for Conference of the Parties. A conference obviously implies a gathering. So the question is, a gathering of parties to what and to do what? So let me clarify. The Conference of the Parties is a conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and to the Paris Agreement. Now, both of them, in technical terms, are international treaties that are governed by international law. International law is what I do, is what I practice, is what I teach. I'm not here to do that. But it is important to understand that almost everything that happens around the COP in technical terms is governed by international law. Now, why do we even have COPs? Why do we even have a COP? We have it because it is the body, the institution that takes forward the implementation of the UNFCCC and of the Paris Agreement. So when you look at the text of the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement, it's a bare bones structure. A lot of it needs to be finalized. And this is where the COPs come into play. How do they do them? Through negotiations. So when you hear negotiations at the COPs or before the COPs, this is what we're talking about. And at the end of the COP, something happens. You may have seen pictures of the COP presidency with a gavel saying, adopted, adopted. What they're adopting are Conference of the Party decisions that have as a content the implementation of the treaty. Now, what has happened from day one to now, to COP26? And obviously, I am giving you just a sketch, a very small flavor of it. But what is important to understand is that the past Conference of the Parties have shaped how the world, and in particular states, although not only states, have decided to respond to climate change. To give you one example, the Paris Agreement, which as of today is still the framework that is regulating how countries deal with climate change. Yes, it was adopted at COP21, but actually it's the result of 4 years of negotiations that started in Durban in COP17 in 2011. And one thing I want to highlight from the start, if you read in the newspapers or somewhere that there will be a Glasgow agreement, that COP26 will pave the way for the new way in which countries will deal with climate change, that is not correct. What I mean by that is that the countries have agreed the way forward. And the way forward is the Paris Agreement. We may like it, we may dislike it, we may think it works, we may think it doesn't work. But that is what we have. Glasgow will not, because there are no negotiations that go in that direction, create a new agreement. I just want to put that out very, very clearly. Now, from 1992 to 2015, this part of the negotiations of the COPs, what has happened? The world has moved from a top-down, which means a legally binding, but only for some countries, those who were part of a specific group of countries under the Kyoto Protocol, that they had to do something when it came to emission reductions. And if they didn't do it, there were actually some consequences. To what we have now, which is a bottom-up framework. And by bottom-up, we mean something that actually applies for all. So every single member of the United Nations, party to the Paris Agreement, is a member of the Paris Agreement and has to do something. However, this is voluntary, meaning that there's no real consequence if that country doesn't do that something. And I will explain now what is it that the Paris Agreement tells countries to do, and more importantly, will that actually solve climate change? So, There will only be 2 slides where I take you through the actual wordings of provisions. This is the first one. So the overall goal of the Paris Agreement says the following. Parties will hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. 2 key points here. 1, from 2018 onwards, we can clearly say that science, and by science I mean the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, really tells us that we only have, and as of today I would say 9 years, more than 10 years. We have 9 years to really deal with the most severe dangers coming from climate change. And unfortunately, for many countries, and in particular for some low-lying islands, it's already too late. But really, the clock is ticking. And secondly, we need to be aware that there is no such thing as a global parliament. There's no such thing as a global police that can dictate and oblige what countries should do to meet this temperature goal. So what is it that the Paris Agreement tells countries to do? Well, we find it in this other provision, in Article 4.2, which says, and I quote, each party shall prepare, communicate, and maintain successive NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that it intends to, not shall, that it intends to achieve. But there's a second part to this provision. Parties shall pursue domestic mitigation measures with the aim of achieving the objective of such contributions. So if you think about it, we have 2 different parts of this provision, of this framework in international law that deals with climate change. First, we have an international dimension. These are the NDCs. These are the pledges. And this is practically your prime minister, your president, going before the other prime minister and presidents of the world and saying, this is what I promise when it comes to climate change. I will reduce 30% based on 1990 levels. I will reduce even more. I will reduce 60% based on 2005 levels. I will do something different. It's up to every single country. Every single country is sovereign to decide whatever they want when it comes to emission reductions. They do have to think that all together they will meet that temperature goal. However, there's a national dimension, which is very important. They say this at the international level, but they then have to take domestic mitigation measures. These are national laws and policies, which practically is then going back to their country and to their constituents saying, well, this is how domestically I will meet my international promise. Now, this opens a huge, interesting box and a huge, interesting Pandora box, which we don't have time to go into today. We can talk about, if you want, a bit in the Q&A, maybe for another training, because this brings accountability through domestic climate change litigation, which is absolutely booming as we speak. So is this working? Will this work? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. There's no other way of saying it. So these are the reductions needed by 2030 based on 1990 levels in order to move towards a 1.5 degrees. We need to reduce 45%. If the pledges are met, we'll only reduce 1%. If you look at it in this way, this is more looking a bit longer term, 2050. This is the temperature goal that we need to reach. This is the temperature that we will achieve if the pledges are met. So if our prime ministers and president actually do what they say they're going to do. If we actually go business as usual, we'll have an almost 3% degrees increase. So it's quite gloomy what we have in front of us, which means that we need to act even stronger and do even more. So going back to COP26, how does COP26, this event that the UK, that the world, that today the G7 presidents are saying, it's so important. What is it gonna do? How does it take forward the implementation of the Paris Agreement? And importantly, should we look at COP just in this technical, narrow, legal way, or is COP relevant in any other way? So, what has happened is the following. If you look at the Paris Agreement in 2015, if you want to digest all those pages of legal technicalities, you will read quite often that the provisions say, we say this and this, but at the first conference of the parties, we will complete this with further details, meaning that the Paris Agreement was not a complete framework. there needed to be what? Negotiations and COP decisions in order to complete that picture. Now, the point is that a lot of this, most of it, has already been done. So the so-called Paris rulebook has already been negotiated and mostly adopted 3 years ago at COP24 Katowice. Stuff about mitigation, adaptation, finance, transparency, compliance. Not all of it, though. So what is left at COP26? And is it really so important to consider Glasgow as the turning point in the fight against climate change? So these are the technical matters that should have been negotiated over the past year and a half and should be completed in November. Article 6, market-based measures. This is not complete at all. And yes, it's important. It's a particular way of dealing with climate change using the so-called forces of the market, emissions trading, what was once called clean development mechanism, which now will have a different name, and so forth. Article 13, which actually, as technical as it is, will be important, which is how to compare different NDCs going forward. And then for the legal geeks, the regulations of the compliance committee, which is very much something particularly important and interesting, but very complex as well. And then they will have to start launching the post-2025 finance goal, which is incredibly important. Again, was mentioned, for example, today by the G7. Now, this is not the only things that will happen at Glasgow COP26, because what happens is that the COP presidency, and in this case, let's not forget that it's not just the UK, although no UK media says that, it's actually the UK and Italy, and most Italians don't know it. So anyway, it's both UK and Italy to have a joint COP presidency. And they have identified 5 areas: adaptation and resilience, energy transition, finance, nature, and transport as their key 5 priorities. Now, what usually happens is that the COP presidency, through its diplomatic press, skills, capacity, pushes these 5 items on the agenda in order to do what? In order to start developing the international architecture for post-COP26 legacy beyond the Paris Agreement. Because obviously climate change is so important that you need to find any way, every forum to make a small indent, to make a small progress. So this part is also important when we think at COP26. It's not just about the legal technicalities, it's also about these other areas and bigger picture, and how in particular the UK COP presidency and the Italian COP presidency can push that. So, how do you measure the success of COP26? There are 2 ways of doing it. One, again, a bit more narrow, a bit more technical, if we have COP decisions at the end. If on those 4 areas that I mentioned, you end up having a COP decision on the last day, again, those of you who have either been at COPs or have seen COPs, the COP presidency has a gavel and puts his gavel on the table and says, COP decision adopted. If you have that, you may say, oh, COP26 has been a success. We adopted 18 COP decisions and the Paris rulebook is finished. Other people would say, no, the success of a COP26 will be if it moves all of us, states, non-state actors, civil society, towards more closely towards a 1.5 degrees goal and net zero world. But how do you measure such a success? How do we know whether this will really happen? So this is up for grabs. Now let's move to the second part. And this is where, again, when I finish, I'd love to hear more also from you, from the island ambassadors. And it's about looking at all of this from an island lens. And I'd like to highlight 2 things. One is about fairness and equity. And the other is actually talking about what will happen at COP26 or may not happen at COP26. So islands have always had a very important role and presence at the international climate change negotiations at the various COPs, from COP1 to COP25. The Alliance of Small Island States, the Least Developed Country Group, actually, although maybe in numbers and so forth are not so, numbers of people, let's say, are not so strong, have actually showed an incredible capacity to negotiate and to lobby their own interests. For obvious reasons also because they are particularly vulnerable to climate change. as you all know. One example is the fact that they secured at Paris the presence of loss and damage in the Paris Agreement, rather than just have it as a subheading of the provision on adaptation. It's true that when you then look at the nuts and bolts of loss and damage in the Paris Agreement, a lot of small island developing states were not happy of how it ended, of how it was structured, but nevertheless, it is present in the Paris Agreement in a dominant way. And the last point I would say here is that I do think that more and more, not just in the climate change COP, but also in other international negotiations, the SIDS are really pushing towards seeing themselves and showing themselves not as small, but as large oceanic states. But if we go back to this orange box, the one with the negotiation agenda, let's say, this is just my opinion, but I don't think there's really, maybe except the last one, the launching post-2025 finance goal, there's nothing that really stands up as a huge red line for island countries in the forthcoming negotiations. Although all of these obviously are important for every country, hence also any SIDS. But what about these? These I do think are much more relevant. I mean, again, I leave almost the voice to you here in the debate. Adaptation and resilience, energy transition, finance, nature, transport, all of these speak to islands both before and after COVID-19. So here the question is, bring the voice of the islands on these 5 areas. How? So through the official negotiations, through side events, through fora, in person, virtual. Again, we can have a discussion about that. And what for? What for? Again, the idea is that you have these priorities to, as you see there, develop an international architecture. As frustrating, if you want, as the UNFCCC system may be, at least it gives you a seat at the table that you don't have, for example, today in Cornwall at the G7. So this is something to be very, very careful about and keep in a very precious way. So these are the forums where SIDS and small islands, developing states, and also other least developed countries and also other small countries do have a voice. And it's something that needs to be taken into account. Now, COP26 will not be as any other COP for obvious reasons, and that obvious is COVID. There will be challenges to bring the voice of the islands in the COP26 negotiations. And I do think that this actually raises bigger issues about COPs generally speaking, and of international negotiations going forward, not just for the next 2-3 years when hopefully we'll have finished this nightmare that is COVID. And this is just a wee quote that I found from some official documentation coming out from the talks that are happening virtually, obviously, between the UNFCCC and COP and the COP presidency. And you can read it yourself, but it doesn't look good. To give you one example, usually what happens is that a delegation of a small island developing state will go to a COP for 2 weeks, and their expenses, they'll have diets paid by the UN. If the UK keeps the regulations as they are now, in order to come to Glasgow, you have to quarantine 10 days in a hotel. Who's going to pay for that? Is it going to be the UN? Is it going to be the UK? Is it going to be the small island developing state? It's very unclear yet. And unfortunately, we are getting much closer to November, and something has to happen for clarity to occur. A month before COP26, we'll have another COP, very important, of the Convention on Biological Diversity in China. And what it seems that what may happen in China is that China will say only those living in China can attend the COP, which would mean that all the embassies in China will have to send delegations from their own embassies. Will that happen in the UK? We don't know. Let me finish with something quite different, which is the project that SCELG and Island Innovation will be carrying out together. Let me just give me a few minutes to introduce it, and then I will be finished. This project wants to bring the voice of the islands to COP26. And I'll explain when we want to do it, which voices and how. It's very important to understand that for us, it's important to talk about COP not just in those 2 weeks, but also before and after. So we're going to work on this project before, in August, September, during the COP, but also after to provide some legacy. Which voices? We're interested in the youth here. They're obviously not the most important, but if you think about it, they are the least responsible of all, and they're the ones that will bear the biggest brunt of climate change. And when you do give youth, even the younger ones, as well as the ones that we will be working with, primary school children, they have some incredible ideas that are worth listening to. So we will be engaging with primary school children in Scottish Islands schools and in islands in the Netherlands, in Greece, in Spain, in the Solomon Islands, in Barbados, in the US, and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But, and this is here where I would love to work with as many island innovation ambassadors as possible. There is a possibility, there's a potential to include as many islands as there are. And I'm really, really keen to do so. So let me explain to you how we plan to engage with youth for primary school children. We're going to do it in 3 steps. So before COP26, there will be virtual or in-person workshops at the schools where pupils will be, 1, introduced to climate change, energy, renewables in a fun and an exciting way. And we will try, because it's not easy, to make them understand what in the earth is going to happen at Glasgow in November. What in the earth is this COP26? Now, don't worry, training will be provided. We are partnering with fantastic partners, not just with Island Innovation, and we will be working all together on this. Once they get what climate change is, or at least have a bit of a sense, and they understand who will be at COP26 and what it's going to be about, they will create a message, they will put it in a bottle, and they will send it to Glasgow. Now, during COP26, we will organize, in collaboration with Island Innovation as well, virtual and in-person events where we will share these messages in the bottles to a diverse range of stakeholders. To give you 2 examples, we're thinking with colleagues from other partners of a sculpture that will capture these messages and the bottles, and a virtual map where you can literally, hopefully, see these messages coming from one island to the other and reaching Glasgow, and then zooming into the various messages. After COP26, it's very important that we go back to these primary school children, to their teachers, to the schools, to the communities, to tell them what happened. If not, it really doesn't make sense. So the pupils will receive a second virtual or in-person visit, and they will be told who received their message in a bottle, what they thought about it, and what, if anything, they plan to do with it. If you are interested, this is the to-do list, if you want to put it like that. And the most important thing is to reach out to Isabel, and thank you so much, Isabel, for agreeing to do this in the next 2 weeks. So we're giving you a 2-week deadline, noting your interest. And if you do have any comments or questions about how this is going to work out or how this is going to, anything, just put it down in that email, and I will do my best to reply by the end of the month. We are hiring, as we speak, a project manager who will start working at the beginning of August. And that person will reach out to you towards the mid of August to start working with you. And just as I put in the previous slide, we will have sessions in schools, training, debriefs, and really create a nice community with the children, with the teachers, and with the island ambassadors who want to be a part of this. Just some final remarks on COP26. Again, if you do see in a newspaper or anybody saying that there's going to be a new Glasgow agreement that will shape how everybody will deal with climate change going forward, I'm afraid they don't really grasp how the international climate change legal regime is working. So COP26 will not lead to a new global framework to deal with climate change. We already have it. It's called the Paris Agreement. Is it going to be a success? It depends very much if you look at it narrowly, just the negotiations, or the momentum it builds towards a net zero world. There are still serious doubts on how COP26 will proceed, and I do think this has major implications both for islands and going forward in relation to the future of Conference of the Parties. And last but not least, it would be my utmost pleasure to work with as many of you as possible in the climate change message in a bottle project. You have my email here, you have our Twitter accounts, both myself, my personal one, and the one of the center. And I would be very happy to be in touch via email and via social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I think this is a really good presentation. And as we discussed before, some of the ambassadors, they don't know about COP, or they didn't have information regarding to COP. So I think this is really useful for them. So now, if you have any questions, you can write in the chat because you have time. If you are interested, or if you are not clear with some of the information that Francesco provided us, so you can ask. Let me check if we have questions in the chat.
I see there's somebody called Sudarsha de Silva who was a participant in COP15, 17, COP21.
Oh,
So
maybe we can
if
listen.
Sudarsha is here, I would be delighted to hear also from him or him or her, sorry.
Yes.
If
So
anything that I said resonates, or if there's something that he or she may want to comment.
Hi, Francisco. I'm here. Well, no, I think you explained correctly. I think I don't have to say anything, like you explained everything correctly. So, well, I was in the climate negotiations for quite a long time since I started. COP15 was my first one. That was in 2009. So that time I was just 25 years old, and I was in the roundtable discussions, sitting in the negotiations representing Sri Lanka. So that was my first experience. And in 2011, I managed to initiate the first side event for Sri Lanka. And I did the first side event for Sri Lanka. It's a youth-based event because we did a campaign for Rio Plus 20, as well as we created a digital media campaign on climate change called Make It Green Again. I will share a link here so everybody can see it. So we also launched a music video, like a song from Sri Lanka, and it was shared in 150 countries, and we launched it in the side event. So, and that was also, we did with schools. So I have a lot of partnerships with the local schools in Sri Lanka. So I'm really interested on your initiative.
Perfect.
And after that, I was also involved with the regional consultations, because I was a regional representative for Paris post agreements, not the post, the post agreements. Basically, before the Paris Agreement, we had pre-COP. So pre-COP is a conference which happening before the COP. So basically, in the pre-COP, we come up with the key outcomes for the negotiations. So the key decisions. These are the key decisions that we're going to take out. So I was one of the facilitators in I had to be in the Latin American region for 6 months. So I had to travel to Brazil, Argentina, and I was in the regional coordinator for the post agreements, and that is before the Lima, the Peru conference. So after that, in 2015, we managed to get the Paris Agreement, and it was very hard. And so if I to tell you, like, we had 4 days the plenary getting postponed. So last 4 days, no discussions, and the plenary keeps because there were lots of political issues, and even there was a debate of, like, even there were a lot of diplomatic issues as well. And I remember all the civil society movements gathered around the French president's house. So basically, that's how the summit went. So even that time, the Paris the president, or the former president of Paris, he went and met all key negotiators to get them on board for a common agreement. So that's how the Paris Agreement came up. So it was very interesting.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Sir Dacha, for sharing your experience with us. I think it's really valuable. And I don't know, Francisco, if you have something to add, but we have more people in the chat that say that they have a connection with the COP. For example, Karim. So maybe you can, Karim. So I will ask you to unmute. Maybe you can tell us about your experience with the COP26.
Hi, yes, good day everybody. Are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear.
Okay, yes. So I'm just from one of the ambassadors from Belize. And it's funny that we're having I guess this small training right now because I'm currently in training to be one of the junior negotiators representing Belize at COP26. So it's interesting that now I'm focusing on or just to kind of give you some background on the process that we're going through, I know that we negotiate under the umbrella of AOSIS, which is the Alliance of Small Island States, no? So it's basically, I think most of the islands that are represented in this ambassadorship, I think can negotiate at COP under this umbrella as well. And so I know that right now I'm studying or I'm focusing just on the just transition work stream, specifically for capacity building. So that's the work stream that I will be following at COP26. And this has been a very interesting process so far because this will be my first time representing the country. So I'm learning as much as I can about the process this year, which is very interesting. So this is very helpful for me as well. So when this November comes, I'm able to fully represent the country. So yeah, that has just been my experience so far.
Thank you.
Process.
Okay, thank you so much, Karim. Francesco?
One thing, Isabella, I wanted to add. Obviously, I pitched my explanation of COP26, trying to really clarify what a COP is to somebody potentially that had never even heard a COP or wasn't very aware of a COP. To fully understand how a COP works, the technicalities, let's say the legal aspects and the negotiations, it's a much more complex picture, as our previous speaker just mentioned. And just understanding the whereabouts of the negotiations that will happen in Glasgow, the pre-COP, as again, I think Sudarsha himself mentioned. We are currently in the intercessional, which means obviously negotiations between COPs that are taking place in Bonn, although online. It's a world, and there are trainings and there are capacity building elements. So it's a fascinating but very complex environment.
Yeah, if I can just add quickly, this is James Francesco. I attended 3 or 4 COPs as part of the Republic of Seychelles team for delegation. So it was part of those AOSIS meetings. And I think even after 3 COPs, I still was nowhere near understanding the full process. I mean, there is just so much happening. I think at one there was 30,000 people in areas which it's difficult to imagine now post pandemic or during pandemic, I should say. And there are just so many different components, different things happening, and it's a really powerful place to be when there's that much opportunity to make decisions. At the same time, also quite frustrating, I think, when viewed from the outside, because or from the inside too, because people often see kind of all this talk and not necessarily the commitment to action. But over the course of 26 years, I mean, progress has been slow, but over 190 countries all coming together to commit to something's not going to be an easy process. So
just to add to that, just to give you a sense of the physical environment of a COP, imagine 3 different spaces. One are rooms where you can only enter if you have a specific badge. That is a badge of a negotiator. And those rooms will have agendas that will lead to a conference of the party decision. And that's where people representing Seychelles, the AOSIS group, the LDC, and so forth, will be fighting with their nails, scrapping with their nails to get the wording they want. So they want a specific percentage in that specific provision. They want the word shall instead of the word should, and so forth and so forth. And those will go on, especially in the last days, literally till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. The negotiators will sleep 3-4 hours and then start again. You then have another part of the building, usually the same building, at least this is how it was in Paris, where you can only enter if you have a specific badge of observer, and you have to be accredited before the UNFCCC. And that is, when I entered it the first time, it reminded me of an exhibition of automobiles, Volkswagen, Golf, and BMW, Mercedes, and all these were countries. Every country had its own pavilion, and all these countries had side events where they talked about the 5 elements that I mentioned, for example, or other aspects. That's where a lot of pressure can be given to the negotiators to some extent, because the negotiators will leave the room so that they only can go in and will go participate as speakers, as participants, as getting a coffee in this other part of the building. You then have a third space, which is outside of this building, where anybody can go. Any person living in Glasgow or being in Glasgow at COP26 will be able to go. And that is the civil society zone. So that's where anybody who has a room, let's say, who has a venue, can organize something. It could be theater, it could be music, it could be scientific, it could be anything you think of. When you have a normal COP, all of this brings together 50, even 60,000 people. That's how big it is.
We have a question in the chat, so I think it's regarding to this. So why it is made so difficult?
Why is it made so difficult? I think if we can have him online, maybe he can explain what he means by that. So I'm talking to Rooney Calmera here.
Rooney? So where is Rooney?
Yes.
Rooney? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Maybe you can see me. Yeah, no.
Yes, we can see you, Rooney.
Yes. Yeah, so my question is, I mean, so many people negotiating all the time, etc. I mean, the goal is to make decisions, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So the question is, why can't it be organized another way? Is it possible to organize it in another way?
Okay.
Because if I so many people and so many organizations trying to fight wording,
yeah,
to say no. Like, hey, is it made on purpose so difficult? Can the decisions, because the decisions need to be made? Can the decision be made easier? That's my question.
I'll say 2 things. I'll say 2 things to that. Okay. One, the topic matter, the subject matter is a very difficult one. So we're talking about, according to some, the most daunting, intractable challenge of the 21st century, climate change. And you're trying to put together 194 different voices. Try getting 194 friends and not so many friends and agree where to go for dinner. Good luck with that. Same thing to some extent here. So, you know, it cannot be easy if you have 194 states together dealing with one of the most important things in the world. Now, having said that, this does raise another issue, which is, are COPs the way forward? Is the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the solution to climate change? So without expanding too much, because I can spend all night on this, but one option could be, forget about 194. It's just too complicated. We'll never get there. Let's start with sectors. And let's start with specific countries. So to give you 2 examples, we know that the cement industry is responsible for 6% of the global emissions. I don't know if it's 6, it could be 6, 4, 2, whatever. Why do we need countries that don't do a lot of cement or produce a lot of cement? Let's just get the companies and the countries involved in cement, and let's put them together in a room. Forests are so important. Let's just get the countries with more forest to decide something. Now, is that the way forward? There are pros and cons with that. The one thing that the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement does provide for is that everybody has a voice, which, as Rooney says, does make it difficult to agree. But if you do want everybody to have a voice, then you need something multilateral like this.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. We have another question in the chat from Stacy. So how can we effectively shape a space at COP26 to represent the interest of the small island developing states regarding to the issue of climate change and food security?
So to Stacy, I think I need to ask what she means by we. So how can we effectively shape? Is that we island ambassadors? Is that we people like her who live and represent, small island developing states?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Hi there. Hi, guys. I meant, yeah, people who are most affected by food security. Sorry, I'm at a spot where the lighting isn't so good. So we're affected by it. It's very difficult. I mean, that picture you painted sounded like a gladiatorial combat in Roman times. I was like, what the heck? How can we as little places compete with that? So unless we collaborate in terms of, small island developing states collectively and make our presence felt, but that's kind of what I meant, so it would actually reach the people.
There are a block of countries where, again, the states have a voice. And that is, as somebody mentioned before, the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. You then have I think it's called the Group of 77, which is mainly the LDCs, but in some cases together with China. And it's really it goes very much down. And I was delighted to see that a lot of, at least several here, either have already been to COPs or are thinking of going to COPs and are working in order to get more capacity to go to COPs and so forth. Sometimes being a small island developing states or being a small country, if you have the right diplomatic skills and good negotiation skills and find yourself in those corridors in the right places, can actually be very powerful. So you do have examples of small island developing states getting together and being able to push the agenda. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Obviously, the moment the big players come in, then it gets complicated. And in terms of another question you had, Stacy, you said, that food security is very important and should be put into those 5 lists. The 5 list has been decided by 2 countries, and that's it, by UK and Italy, because that is the COP presidency. Just like France decided, Chile decided, Peru decided, Morocco decided, Poland decided. So the moment you host a COP presidency, you decide also what is not on the official agenda, because again, to clarify, the official agenda is just what needs to finish in terms of the negotiations, which is very little, very, very little. But then you have these other 5 themes where the UK and Italy have an agenda of their own that they want to push. The question that I had for all of you is, does that align? And you're telling me yes and no, because I am seeing food security not there. So then the question is, to those who will come to Glasgow, if somebody can come to Glasgow, how to organize, say, side events, how to organize the stuff in the civil society sector, where food security comes up as a very important issue.
Yes, okay, thanks for that. Thank you very much, Francesco.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. I think we have 2 more questions. So the first is JC. So you can ask your question because, okay, you.
Yeah, Dr. Sindico, let me just put it this way. You made a very interesting analogy. Take a large group of people and get them to agree on where to go to lunch. It's impossible. And it's irrelevant. Why would they ever need to agree on that? If you know what I mean. People have different tastes, they have different cultures, etc. So putting them in a room and making them decide on where they should all go to lunch is irrelevant, basically. What would be more useful is if, more proactive members of that group came together to them and said, listen, if you like Italian food, here's some good options. If you like Thai food, here's some good options. So what would be much more useful from this type of discussion is not bringing everybody together to see how they can do the same things, but decide what are some options that can make governments actually take concrete steps. What are some things that can incentivize companies to take concrete steps? What can you do as individuals in society? Why is it not
Okay,
structured that way?
so let's say there are two things I would like to say here. One, if we all decide to go eat wherever we want, nothing really happens, as you said. If we don't agree how to deal with climate change, we're all in a huge problem. It's not like going to eat in different places. So, but I see where you're going with this, and it's a great analogy. The other thing is that, and obviously, I mean, I didn't have too much time. To some extent, it works exactly as you said, because in the negotiations, you then have countries that say, okay, come and have a coffee with me. And let's talk business here, you know? And you have the champions. So sometimes you will hear, if you follow the negotiations, you have the champions of the adaptations group. And that means that of the 195, you have 50 countries that say adaptation is important, and we're going to push this on the agenda, and we're going to bring everybody back. So at Paris, there was the Friends of the Human Rights, led by Mexico and some others. So these things happen, even in the negotiations. And usually it's a tick for tack, you know, as any negotiation. But what I take from your comment is also something that is also happening, which if you want to go all academic and theoretical, you have these words: polycentric governance, multi-level governance, blah, blah, blah. It just means, you know, everything, we just need to do everything, which is where you have, at the same time, the international negotiations, then you have the sectorial efforts led also by private companies, by private sector. You have civil society going to courts, which I highlight again, is booming all over the world and is pushing countries for domestic accountability of their international promises. You have the youth, the climate emergency dimension and everything. So the picture is much bigger than just a COP when it comes to the fight against climate change. But obviously, when you hear on the news all the time, COP26, COP26, I think it's important to understand what is the technicality of a COP and what will happen or not happen at COP26.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Karim, your question, and if we have time, we will go for the next question.
Yeah, so it wasn't more of a question, but more of a comment, just to kind of, you know, piggyback off of what James was saying, Francesco, no? What I think we need, because being in the process, I realized that us as small islands, we need more training as it relates to understanding that process. Because like what James mentioned is that it is a very complex process to understand. There are many things happening at the same time. And based on stories that I've heard, especially dealing with AOSIS and other small island states, is that many of our representatives go to these COPs and they learn on the spot without any previous knowledge, without any previous training, without actually understanding the process. And that is where we kind of fall short as small island states, because if we have individuals going there who don't really understand the complexity of the process, then how can we diplomatically negotiate and negotiate on behalf of our small island states? So that has been one of the issues that me specifically have been pushing with our leaders, for us to get more training as a collective. So when we do go on that frontier, we could better negotiate on behalf of our small island states. So that was just a comment that I wanted to kind of throw in there.
But I think it's a very important point, and I'm sorry to put it like that. It actually gets much worse, Karim, because here we're just talking about COP26.
I know, because
there are 200 multilateral environmental agreements, each one with a conference of the party. They don't take place every year, thanks God. They take place every 2 or 3 years. But that means, and just taking Belize as an example, that Belize, if it's party to 100 of these, will have to send people, sometimes often the same person, to all these COPs around the world, trying to understand the technicalities, the outcomes, and how to negotiate them. The challenge is huge. But now I mean, obviously this is a discussion to have as island ambassadors, but here, even places like Island Innovation, even my own university and places like that, have a potential role. And there are plenty of trainings out there, not huge amounts, but there are trainings out there. But if this is a need that is coming out from discussions like this, then it's a question of those who somewhat understand better the system to, work with people like you, Karim, and others, so that when you arrive at a COP, like the Glasgow one or the one in China or the one about chemicals or the one about dangerous waste, the future ones about plastic pollution, there may be a treaty there with a COP, that you're actually, as you say, better prepared.
Also, we can consider to have a more training session regarding to COP in the future, because COP is on December, so we have time to continue discussing. And one more question, but really short, because we need to finish now, from EILEAN. So let me ask you to unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am listening here and just finishing up with climate change mitigation and sustainability as in the dissertation. One of the things that really came out was involvement, but involvement in reference to collaboration. And I'm listening to everyone talking about COP26 and talking about the difficulty in getting things done and understanding what is happening. And it just had my brain running as a creative person. And I'm saying, why don't we, for example, let us look at small island states in the Caribbean, for example. Why don't we have that similar idea that where we bring 200, 300 delegates together? Why don't we have that same thing in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Islands, and then if we do that there, then we have people who already understand what is happening, because the situations honestly are not the same. The countries are culturally different, and also we should know that bigger countries will always have a bigger say in situations like that most times. So the small fish get eaten up by the bigger fish there. So why don't we, instead of trying to focus, let us go there and probably get confused and misunderstand or get misinformed. Why don't we do those delegations within our small spaces, then pull it together? So Barbados, instead of Barbados just doing it by themselves, Barbados, Dominica, St. Lucia, the whole Caribbean comes together and do that and have one delegation with one purpose. Then the Pacific Islands would do the same and have one with one purpose. And maybe that would be easier. Or am I probably going the wrong way with it? I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you so much for this question, Francesco, in really short time to answer.
It's a huge political ask, and it would depend on countries being so friendly to each other to be able to coordinate 15 votes on behalf of one person there. And also, countries like to have a moment to shine at the end of every COP, where they have their minute of glory in front of everybody to say what they have to say. But I mean, in principle, it would be a good idea. And for example, at the WTO, that does already happen, where you have groups of countries talking as one. So it's not unheard of.
Okay, thank you so much for this really good presentation. I think it's really good to speak about COP and all regarding to this summit or this event. So we are recording this session. I will send to you by email, and thank you so much. If you have any question, you can send me in the by email, and I can ask Francesco, or if you want to participate in Francesco's project, so send me an email and I will be happy to answer all your questions. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye,
so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Take care.